Today we are so happy to have Casey Piket with us, and we're going to delve into the beginnings of this organization, the Miami Pioneers, and we're also merged with the natives of Dade. So two illustrious groups, the Miami Pioneers, of course, going all the way back to 1936, when some prominent people decided that all those people that were here before 1900 really deserved to have their history considered and appreciated and celebrated. And then the natives of Dade just kind of grew up organically from people saying, "You were born here? I'm not born here. What? Where were you born?" So, it was kind of rare in the old days if you were born here, right, to meet somebody else. You had to stop and have a conversation right away. So in 2002, our groups merged together, and we became a group with a really long name, the Miami Pioneers and Natives of Dade. So that's the elevator speech. And so now we're going to delve into the beginnings of the Miami Pioneers. And even prior to that, back into the 1750s. No, just kidding. So, but it was unusual to get here before 1900. And listen, the mosquitoes, like the lack of infrastructure, what were they thinking? All right, my family came here in the 1890s, and they were in Florida in the 1870s, and I still wonder, what the hell were they thinking? But they were dreaming of living in the tropics, and this beautiful fruit just was falling off of the trees and landing on the ground, and all the orchids and the palm trees and the balmy breezes and stuff. So yeah, there was that good side of it. But when they finally put screening on the porch and the mosquitoes couldn't get you, that's when they started really living. So let's hear it for Casey. Thank you, Casey, for being here with us today.
Thank you, Rob. How was the audio to those in the back? Can you hear okay? Good? Awesome. So as Robert had mentioned, and he reaches out to me periodically and says, would you come and do a talk in front of the Miami Pioneers native of Dade? And my first question is always, well, what topic? And he goes, you choose. And so I've given about 2 or 3 of these prior to now, even before you were here at the library back at a church in Coral Gables. And so I said, well, why don't we talk about really your organization and its history? Ironically enough, I knew some of it, but I didn't know a lot of it, so I dug in and I researched. So before I do that, I should introduce some of the things that I've done. I do have a website that I began in 2012 called miami-history.com. It's part of the Substack application layer. If anyone's heard of Substack, there's a lot of authors that publish out in Substack. I provide a lot of free content. I do a weekly This Week in History with a lot of great pictures. So if you're not a subscriber today, you can become a free subscriber and begin to get some emails around South Florida history. I focus primarily or almost exclusively on Miami-Dade County. I still have trouble saying Miami-Dade County. It's Dade County, right? I mean, for all of us, yeah. I also have a book that I published with Dr. Paul George. I brought some, so maybe at the end, if somebody's interested in purchasing a book, I know many of you in this room have already done that, but in case you are, I do have, I brought a bunch of books. So I want to jump right into it and talk about the one thing that jumped out at me as I kind of revisited the stories of a lot of the people that came here early. Before Miami was a city, we had Lemon City, we had Coconut Grove, and really the people that came down here were very rugged people, but they were also very sentimental people. They understood the value of the place that they settled. So beginning, and here's a photograph of downtown Miami in 1890. I believe it was taken by Ralph Monroe. And really the whole collection of folks in Coconut Grove, the story was really captured well by Ralph Monroe when he published the Commodore story. And one of the things that he would talk about in that story is that really people that settled in Coconut Grove before there was a city, 1890, at the time that this photograph was taken, there were 30 people along the Miami River, according to the census. That's it. People were concentrated in Coconut Grove. There was a smaller community up in Lemon City, but it was a tropical frontier. And so Ralph Monroe, we would talk about those early years and just talk about how beautiful the place was. But in the back of his mind, he knew that development and progress were going to make its way down to South Florida. So very reluctantly, he would prophesize and say that, eventually we need to appreciate this now because eventually this is all probably going to be in the path of progress. This is Brickell Point, also in 1890. And William and Mary Brickell came down in 1871. Ralph Monroe actually came down because Brickell told him about South Florida, and he came down in the late 1870s. And the two of them came down after purchasing a very large swath of land from somebody that had land to sell, the English family, Harriet English. And they came down, really very quickly understood that, this is going to be developed at some point. We should take advantage of this. And as William Brickell got older, he was known for telling a lot of yarns, as they called them back then. He used to like to sit around and tell stories, and he would often say that one day we will hear the whistle of the train come down to this area. So, whereas Ralph Monroe was sort of regretful that this was going to get all developed, William Brickell was more resolute. He knew it was going to happen, and he just matter-of-factly said it. So as he got older, Mary Brickell really became the matriarch of the family, the chief negotiator, and they began buying up land. Does anyone realize that there was land over by the Marlin Stadium, the Orange Bowl, that were owned by Brickells, and it wasn't part of that original purchase. So they would acquire additional land because they knew at some point in time there was going to be a lot of value there. Now the Brickells were very private, and they did their business very privately. Matter of fact, they didn't trust banks. And so when the panic of 1907 happened, they didn't lose any money because they didn't have any money in the banks for there to be a run on. So the Brickells were in very good position and waiting for kind of development, but they weren't necessarily advocating for it. They weren't going out and trying to accelerate development in the area. That was different when Julia Tuttle actually purchased land. So that downtown picture I had was land that she had purchased in 1891, a year later. And she was always enamored with the area, not only with the beauty, but with the potential. So she would say, and this was even before she had luck convincing Flagler to extend this railway, she would say, "It is the dream of my life to see this wilderness turned into a prosperous southern city." So she had the vision. She saw what Miami could be, and actually, if you look and listen to her words in 1896, she really understood what it was, and her prophecy came true. So she said, "No sacrifice on my part has been neglected to assist in bringing about my convictions of what Miami will eventually be, one of the greatest cities financially, commercially, and residentially, as well as the most important deep water port in all the Southland." Now, she predicted that in 1896. She died 2 years later in 1898, so she didn't get to really see that prophecy fully play out, but she did get to see a lot of progress. So she would reach out to Henry Flagler and Henry Plant and try and convince them, one of the two, to extend their railway and begin the progress. She offered up land, but she had no luck with that until the winter of 1894-95. And there were some freezes that came through in December of 1894, again in February of 1895. At that point, Flagler, who already began to envision extending the railway all the way to Key West, that maybe now is the time to kind of figure out where this frost didn't touch, and for me to begin to start looking going south. Maybe the timing's right at this point. He sent out James Ingram, his right-hand man, to go and figure out where it didn't actually reach, and James Ingram, who had a prior friendship with Julia Tuttle, finally gets down there and realizes that Miami was not touched by the frost. We've all heard the story of the orange blossoms. At some point, Julia Tuttle gathered some foliage, as did Ingram, and brought it back to Flagler and said, "See that the frost didn't make it to South Florida." That really began the process of Flagler planning on coming to Miami, or to an area not named Miami yet, to the Miami River and Biscayne Bay. So at that point, he would start negotiating with Julia Tuttle, who offered half her land, but she also had to negotiate with the Brickells. And so the Brickells had property up in Fort Lauderdale. He knew that he wanted to run his railway over the Miami River and eventually get to Key West, even though he didn't really reveal his plan at that point in time. And so Flagler first began negotiating with the Brickells because they had very clean deeds, and they were able to make their donations without a whole lot of wrangling to figure out how to get through some of the deed issues that Julia Tuttle had. So by October of 1895, he had a deal in place with the Brickles, which included land in Lauderdale, land on the south side. Now, Mary Brickle negotiated this, and she did one thing that was brilliant in my mind. She gave Flagler half their property, but she did it from where Miami Avenue is today, west. All that very valuable land right along the water, she didn't offer up. Flagler wanted it. Julia Tuttle took a different tact, really relied on James Ingram to coach her, because he would let her know how other places that Flagler had extended his railway, we did things. And he talked her into, what you want to do is you want to sell him every other lot. You want to plat it out, sell every other lot. That way, when he sells and he's doing well and getting his money back, you still have good land. Because I'm sure Flagler probably was going to negotiate everything, west at a certain point. And so Julia Tuttle did that and preserved, I believe, I think it's 13 acres of what became Fort Dallas Park. So she maintained that. Flagler had maintained a lot of the land, and really what he did in exchange was he agreed to extend his railway, build a first-class hotel, and then also help develop out the city. Now Flagler, I mentioned everybody was very sentimental. You saw Julia Tuttle's statements, William Brickle, resolute that progress would make it. And pretty much everybody that came down to work on this city understood that they were doing something more than just building a city and doing a job. There was a lot of sentimentality, and they understood that as they were doing it. Flagler, not so much. I mean, it was just a stop for him. He wanted it to be successful. He put a lot of financial resources into it. A lot of his people ended up settling in the area. And those were some of the really early charter pioneers that began to start thinking about in 1914 that we need to start kind of recalling that we're losing some people. We need to start documenting what we did here. Otherwise, who's going to tell the story? So during incorporation, a lot of people came down to Miami. If you look at the photo in this cover slide, that was Captain Vale's floating hotel. That is the equivalent of a 5-star hotel today for 1896. The problem was that there was no place to stay. Julia Tuttle and Harry Tuttle began working on Hotel Miami, but it was just really progressing so slow that later in the year, when people really needed places to stay, or they would offer up the hotel, rent rooms that didn't even have doors, didn't even have stairs. They had ladders to get up to the second and third floor. So there was not a lot of accommodations, but what you did get here on this barge, which was moved down at the end of where Miami terminates into the Miami River on the north side. So it's called Avenue D back then. But these were the best accommodations in play. Matter of fact, when Flagler sent down John Sewell and his workers to start clearing land, he said, you could stay there. Check in with Julia Tuttle, see what kind of progress they're making on the hotel. They ended up staying here. This is I really love this view. It's a view from the Miami River looking north on South Miami Avenue in downtown Miami. So it's looking north, and by later in the year, you started to get some buildings that people could stay in, and also some commercial buildings. One of the chief early commercial buildings was the building the Tuttles put together called Hotel Miami. You can see there was a big water tower there. Many of you may be familiar with the Christmas time fire in 1896. That water tower came into play to make sure the entire town didn't burn down, because everything, as you can see, was built with wood, including, you had trees around that were all wood as well. So the fires could have been much worse if it weren't for that water tower that they put in place. The Captain Vale's would have been right there, moored at the end of that, but once there started to be buildings and accommodations that, the hotel was no longer viable. If you didn't stay at Captain Vale's, or if you did come in a little bit later, these were your accommodations. You would see people put up very temporary buildings where It was mostly men coming down to do the work, and they would just provide a bed, and they would provide rent for that bed, as you can see on the photo to your left. Or if you brought your family down, you might put together a thatched tent. One of the big problems, and I think Robert had talked about that, was mosquitoes. And so back then, you didn't have you didn't have mosquito nets, you had smudge pots. And smudge pots are something that you light up, and they smelled so bad, it was just really reprehensible in terms of the smell, that the mosquitoes didn't want to be there, but it was really also pretty bad for the people as well. But it did help with the mosquitoes a little bit. So these were the accommodations where people were coming down. And as they began a few years later, a decade or two later, or 15 years later, to think about what they accomplished by coming down and building the city, they were remembering the hardship that they experienced, because it was basically camping. While you went off to work and you came back and you had a bed. So in 1896, during the year of incorporation, Henry Flagler reached out to a guy by the name of E.V. Blackman. He was a writer living in northern Florida. And E.V. Blackman was hired to be the editor and the first writer for the Homeseeker magazine. The Homeseeker magazine was something that Henry Flagler was going to put out to start promoting Miami and start also listing lots and encouraging people to buy some of the lots that he was given in exchange for extending his railway, building the hotel. And that was really how he was thinking about how does he get some of his money back. Really, if you read a lot of Flagler biographies, it was not a moneymaker, extending the railway and building these hotels. And the expenditures really, it wasn't a profitable endeavor. So he was doing anything to get some of his capital back. So what he did is he sent Blackman a bunch of photos right at the very beginning before they started doing work, and then also a description of the plans for the hotel and for the city. And as he was looking at the photos and reading through the plans, one term he used to say, boy, this is just a beautiful place, this is magical. And he came up with the nickname the Magic City. And that was published out to a St. Augustine newspaper, a Jacksonville Times-Union, and it was really syndicated around the South before it was actually published in the Homeseeker magazine, and that name caught on. Now, Miami wasn't the first city to have the Magic City nickname. The first one was Birmingham, and a lot of people think that the Magic City for Miami was it magically just got rebuilt after the fire of 1896, the Christmas time fire, but that is actually the story of Birmingham. This was actually based upon just Blackman looking at pictures and being very nostalgic. So not only did he write for that magazine, but he moved to Miami that year, and he became one of the prominent residents. He started a church, he ran his business, even got into development a little bit as you went through the 1910s and 1920s. So July 28th, 1896, I will point out, let's see if I can do this here. Right here you have, and I know it's a blurry picture, but you have the lobby pool hall. That's where incorporation took place. Now Flagler's intent, and as was everybody else's, is that they were not going to incorporate as a town to have to reincorporate later as a city. So what he decided was that we need to get enough people, and at the time in the state of Florida you had to have 300 voters actually vote to incorporate. And they were short based upon the number of people that came down if you exclude the black workers that were all brought down. So John Sewell, when he came down, he brought down 12 black workers, and then they hired a bunch more from the Bahamas and from Georgia and from northern Florida. And they had about, I think it was like 162 or somewhere in that, over 100, that also voted to make sure that Miami was never a town. And that was sort of the slogan. We never want to be a town, we were a city. And during that, the incorporation proceedings, they did all the formalities. They decided on mayor, they decided on marshal, they decided on all the other officers, the name of the city. They were actually thinking about calling it a couple of different things. It was narrowed down to Flagler and Miami. And when Flagler got wind of it, he said, don't name that city after me. That'll put a much bigger financial burden on me long term. So it became Miami, named for the river that runs right through it. One of the, and we know this through Isidore Cohen's biography, one of the people that got up and spoke, and the most impressive, according to Cohen, was a gentleman by the name of Alexander C. Lightburn. He was a black worker that came down, but he was very well read, self-educated, and he got up and he spoke about just really, let's take a moment to reflect on what we're doing here. This event today will lead to this great city that people are going to look back on and say, this is where it started. Something along those lines, because Isidore Cohen did not share too much of what he said, but it was just a very optimistic and very nostalgic way of looking at what they were doing on that day. So after incorporation, about 18 years later, there were people that they were losing that came in that were, early pioneers. And really a lot of those early pioneers are like, we need to take a step back and we need to document, what we've done here and who did what and who came down and what life was like. So in 1940, they established something called the Old Settlers Association. So this association first met in 1914, right here in this house. Does anybody want to take a guess where this is? I'll give you a hint. It's in downtown Miami. Just raise your hand if you want to throw it out. Elvis, I know you got an opinion.
Well, I was going to say downtown somewhere.
That's like saying the winner of the mystery meat contest was Elvis, who guessed some sort of meat.
Not like next to the river in the Fort Dallas area?
It's actually, this is Southeast 2nd Street. It was called Avenue B at the time. In the foreground, that is the western edge of Royal Palm Park. So these homes were right where Southeast 2nd Avenue is today. On the corner with the Victorian home is where the Huntington building is located today. If you remember the Ermey Hotel, it's right about where Blackman's house was. They all met at Blackman's house.
So that's Blackman's house that you just...
Yeah, that I highlighted. So he, as you would do back in the day, you would put a notice in the paper calling all, original pioneers, meet at the house, and it got around from some of the more prominent ones. And when they set this up in 1914, their goal, which was you must have arrived in Miami during or prior to 1897. It was strictly focused on people that lived or people that came to found the city of Miami. I put this here, the second point, on really all the things that the application required. The application asked for birthplace, length of time in Florida, location prior to arriving in Miami, how long he or she remained, where they currently live in Dade County, and for how long. They were really trying to protect somebody that came down, worked here for maybe the year, and then left, and maybe they came back a little while longer. So they were really almost a purity test in terms of how long and how committed you were for the area. Some of the prominent people that showed up at that meeting to form this association, E.V. Blackman organized it. Dr. James Jackson was another. John Sewell, which is, I'm going left to right. And you had John Siebold. You had Dr. P.T. Skaggs, who was another pioneer physician. You had a lot of very prominent early Miamians that were part of this effort. So the Old Settlers Association was actually an association that predated Miami Pioneers. So it didn't really last that long. So they met initially in 1914. They didn't really have any established goals in terms of what they wanted to accomplish. They just wanted to make sure that they captured the history, and maybe through oral history or stories, but there was no evidence that they actually, gathered pictures or wrote anything. They did meet one other time, and anybody want to guess, where this was located? This is the original Miami Club building, Miami Women's Clubhouse. So if you know where Julie and Henry's is today, or if you remember where the Walgreens are, if you haven't been downtown in a while, it was located right there. And so this was on land donated by Henry Flagler by the Women's Club, which began as a reading group. They started off wanting to provide a reading room, and it was a book club. And they said, we need a library here. And so they approached Flagler, who in 1912 donated that corner, very prime corner, and said, as long as you maintain a public library, and this was the first public library in the city boundaries, you can have this land at no cost. And so they built this building, and this is where the old settlers met in 1915, which was a little bit less than a year after. And their goal was just to talk over business, maybe reunite. It was more or less a social club. But one of the things they did is that they were being honored in the FEC Fair building. So they marched down to the end of today's Flagler Street, and they went to the Fair building. Biscayne Boulevard didn't quite extend out as far as where Bayfront Park is today. So if you can envision the median of Biscayne Boulevard, that was about the water's edge. And this building jetted out at that time. And one of the things that they were given was a pen that read Dade County Old Settlers Association, 1896 to 1915. Is there anybody that's a collector of Miami memorabilia? If you've got that, that's worth a lot. It's a very rare thing. But that was the end of it. This group, I don't think they formally disbanded, but they just didn't meet again. So by 1920, people were putting in questions as they would back then. They would send letters to the editor of the Miami Metropolis and the Herald, and they're like, what happened to this old settlers club? And one of the readers was E.V. Blackman in 1920, and they met. Once again, he pulled together a lot of the early settlers and said, we need to restart this thing. But they wanted to expand the scope from Miami to all of Dade County. So they formed the Dade County Historical Society in 1920. And here's just a clipping from the newspaper on May 27th, 1920, where they met. In this case, it wasn't anybody's home, but they met in the Chamber of Commerce building, which is here to the left. And I should point out, this is right here, First and First. So this is Northeast First Avenue and Northeast First Street. All these buildings are still standing. All of them were built in about 1910 through 1912. So we have the Board of Trade building, the Realty Securities building, and the Miami Bank and Trust on the second floor is where a lot of meetings took place. That was the Chamber of Commerce room. So they met there, and one of the things that they decided at that point, or maybe E.V. Blackman decided, was he was going to write a book. And it was going to be called Miami and Dade County. This is the book. This is a very rare book, and it was published in 1921. And what it does, and it's an invaluable resource for anybody that researches South Florida history, it captures the stories of all those early pioneers. Not all of them, but quite a few of them, and even provided pictures, talked about the early banking institutions, churches, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the inside cover. As you can see, this book doesn't have a jacket that's got nice artwork on it, but on the inside cover you can see that Miami and Dade County, Florida by E.V. Blackman, and it was published in 1921. So that was really the big result of the formation of the Dade County Historical Society. Their goals were, and at this point they've extended the date, must have arrived in Dade County during or prior to 1906. And its purpose, it is intended that the association shall preserve the historical records of the county, mark historical points, to create a museum of pictures and photographs relating to the early history of the county. Now I put that in quotes partly because I thought pictures and photographs were a little redundant. Somebody would probably go, that's not redundant, but this is exactly what they published when they were looking to recruit people and to be a part of this organization. And if you think about it, a lot of the goals of this, now they're stated goals, kind of align to what a lot of the later organizations also decided on, including creating a museum, but mostly capturing those artifacts that were going by the wayside. So this is 1920. The original president, again, E.V. Blackman, C.J. Rose, who became a judge for many years, was vice president, and then there was a curator. So they had plans to create a museum. That never really came to fruition. This organization was fairly active all the way until the early 1930s, and I would imagine the Great Depression. The last reference I saw to it was in '33. Lack of funding, lack of, probably even participation. People were concerned about other things, and this just really fell off the wayside. However, in 1940, others are like, we need to put together an historical society. So they kind of picked up where the other one left off in terms of really what some of the goals are. And one of the people that were part of that was George Merrick. And he became really the face of that for this next level of effort. I know Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, we have a picture out there. She was also part of this as well. So in 1940, Mrs. James Carson, who actually was a history teacher for the University of Miami, said, let's meet at my place and let's organize this historical society. What that led to was the creation of what we know today as History Miami. And this is a building many years later, in 1962, that was purchased by the museum to actually start realizing some of the goals of the Historical Society, including creating the museum, providing exhibits, showing photographs, providing a research room. This was in Edgewater. So this is a little Beaux Arts home that was the first actual building for History Miami, then known as Historical Museum of Southern Florida and the Caribbean. And so it not only captured Dade County, but also captured areas around it. They moved out of here and then moved over to the Science Museum in Vizcaya, and then ultimately in the mid-1980s got the building they're in now. From what I understand, that they're going to probably have to find a new location pretty soon, but this is where it got started. Now, this could be a presentation by itself, just on the museum, but I just wanted to kind of show that connection between some of these legacy organizations and how that dovetailed into a museum. Questions after this? No, go ahead.
Oh, does the house still stand?
It does not. It does not. You know Edgewater has just been completely gutted.
Right.
So this would have been, if anyone ever saw the movie Something About Mary, the building that was used there, this would have been probably a block south of there. And you had really beautiful Beaux Arts buildings or homes, residences that were constructed in the 1920s that just were really dilapidated by even into the 1960s and 70s. So the Miami Pioneers, that brings us to really the first half of this organization, and they began in 1936 and are still ongoing. And Robert mentioned about the merger. We'll talk about that in a moment. And this is really where I'm going to spend the bulk of it. I don't know how much time. I talk a long time, so if Robert, if you can keep me honest, make sure. Okay. So I want to start off with the qualifications. So the Miami Pioneers organization basically stated that you must have settled in Miami prior to 1900. So arrived either 1896, 97, 98, 99, or even prior to that. Charter members must have arrived by 1896. So they were really looking to have two distinguished kind of members, and the charter members were the ones who were 1896 and prior to that. And the purpose is very similar to what you saw with the Historical Society. Preservation of historical data of Miami and Dade County, participation in the city's celebration of Miami's birthday anniversaries. That's an important one, because in 1935, it used to be that Miami would celebrate its birthday on July 28th every year. And it would do it in a variety of different places, normally in a park. And a lot of the early pioneers were kind of disgusted because in 1935, really the celebration was just a bunch of politicians getting up and giving stump speeches for the next election. So they're like, okay, we got to change this. You know, the purpose of these celebrations are really to celebrate the city and its history and its founding. So that was the big reason why in 1936 they did this. They also wanted annual reunions and social gatherings, the settling up of an honor roll for departed pioneers. So this organization used to, for some of those pioneers, they used to put them in an honor roll, but the way they did it is they commissioned somebody to create an oil painting. And those oil paintings hung in the Miami Pioneers building, which I'll talk about in a bit. And a lot of those are still floating around, and at the end of the talk, I'll share with you where you can see some of them. And the last one that they considered a priority that really never got done was the erection of monuments in commemoration of the chief founders in Miami, Henry Flagler and Julia Tuttle. Anyone see something that's missing there? What happened to the Brickles? So by 1936 even, they were really not part of the founding story. So Mary Brickell dies in the early 1920s, William Brickell in 1908, and so by the time that some of these pioneers were recounting, they were not recounting or including the Brickles as founding pioneers. I always say that our founding story is like a three-legged stool. I mean, there's Flagler, there's Julia Tuttle, and then there's the Brickles. You remove any leg on that three-legged stool, it's going to collapse. It needed all three of those groups, or people, four people, to really kind of make Miami happen when it happened in the way it happened. So at that point, they were really not included as part of it. I don't think until really the last 20 years or so that or maybe even 30 or 40 years ago, the Brickles were really kind of including as part of that founding story. Some of the early advocates was Isidore Cohen. Matter of fact, he was the one publishing and telling people, kind of where you can go and register, become a pioneer, and really kind of outlining the criteria. Harry Budge, that last name sounds familiar. His brother was Frank Budge, who created the first hardware store in downtown Miami. Harry Budge was also a prominent early retailer and arrived in 1896. John Sewell, I think a lot of people know John Sewell. He was brought down to clear the land. He stuck around, became an early mayor, and really had a lot to do with Miami. Matter of fact, he wrote a book called Miami Memories or Memoirs, and he declared and considered himself, he put a line in there that says, if Henry Flagler was the father of Miami, then I was the daddy of Miami. Meaning that he did a lot of the grunt work that was there and really, was part of the early founding of the city. So thought a lot of himself, but and he got the opportunity to say that in his book. And a gentleman by the name of William Mark Brown, who was one of the two founders of the Bank of Bay Biscayne. So Cohen puts the article out to the left, and you can see that the article to the right talks about one of our big priorities is to create a monument. Now, there was already a monument for Flagler before they got started. Does anybody know or have heard of Monument Island? And that was Carl Fisher's monument to Flagler. He took a little spoil island, created it, put a big monument on there for Flagler. There wasn't one for Julia Tuttle, actually until recently, until the 2010s. And that was placed on the park. The only thing that she got her name put on originally was the Julia Tuttle Causeway. And then they had Julia Tuttle Way downtown, and then eventually they put a big statue in Bayfront Park. And then, of course, Flagler got another he got a statue on the Dade County Courthouse. So Harry Budge was really the guy that did all the legwork. He got people enrolled, made sure that they understood, did whatever background checks were needed. The reason I put the picture to the right is, and this is from the late 1930s, where the Crest building was, that used to be the Venetian Arcade. He had an office in there, and if you wanted to be a part of the Miami Pioneers, you had to go down there, get an application filled out, and then it was processed by people that worked for Harry Budge. So in 1936, as I mentioned, this organization, the catalyst for them to come together in 1936 was they wanted to put on a better celebration for the city's anniversary. So they did that in Bayfront Park. This is not a picture of that event, but this is a picture of Bayfront Park in 1936. And it's a very interesting look in that you had, let me see if I can go ahead and highlight it here. You had the band shell, and as part of the celebration and as part of prior celebrations, Cesar LaMonica and his orchestra played at that band shell and continued all the way through the 1960s. And there's another building back here called the Royal Palm Club that was built for the Biscayne Bay Yacht Club. And after the hurricane of 1926, that yacht club kind of pulled back. They didn't need the building anymore, so somebody bought it, called it the Royal Palm Club, and it became a gambling den in the 1930s. And it was sort of legal. That was going on, people knew it. They even actually had a manager, a general manager that was running it that had a lot of experience running casinos, or gambling dens. One of the people we haven't mentioned is Roddy Burdine, and Roddy Burdine was a really big part of kind of this, what I call nostalgia or pioneer legacy movement. He was all about Miami, and he was all about promoting Miami. So during the throes of the 1930s, during the Great Depression, he, as well as others, began to think of ways that how can we generate some more tourism, generate some excitement for people to come. So by about 1936, the economy was starting to turn for Miami. And Roddy Burdine was a big part of that. Matter of fact, he worked with a variety of other people, including John Doherty and others, to bring the original Orange Bowl game. And then helped with building out the Orange Bowl. Matter of fact, the first name of the Orange Bowl was Roddy Burdine Stadium. So he died in early 1936. This organization was formed a little bit later, but all the people, and he was involved with that in terms of some of the ideas, and all of the people that I mentioned earlier really wanted to honor Roddy Burdine. So what they did is that they planned an annual banquet to honor Roddy Burdine. And they were smart because they actually got Burdines to help sponsor it. So that continued for probably a good, I want to say more than 10 years, where they would have a banquet. So they had two major events early on. They had the city celebration. Normally that might take place at a park or at another place. Matter of fact, I did mention that first one in 36, on July 28th, it got rained out. So they rescheduled it for August 4th, it got rained out. So they rescheduled it for 2 days later and they finally got it in. But I mean, that's the most Miami thing that you can expect. You get a big celebration, you know, big fanfare. The pioneers were going to be honored. And they all got up and it was almost like a celebrity roast. They were all teasing each other with their speeches. So Isidore Cohen got up and John Sewell and Everett Sewell and everybody was up there teasing each other, and it was supposedly very entertaining according to the newspaper the next day. So the Pioneer Banquet, the first one was at the Miami Women's Club that was built in the 20s. And they would continue and do that for another several years. It would be the venue where they would host the banquet. So here's some, just kind of fast forwarding through a few years after the formation. Each of these events took place at the Miami Women's Club, and they would, just like they do today, they have elections for officers that would come in and take over. They would honor departed pioneers. They would talk through history, but it was more or less a social gathering. So here's the head table at the very top in 1939. In 1940, it was a celebration also of some new officers coming in. One of the guys that came in and was the president through the early 1940s was a guy by the name of J.K. Dorn. He was kind of an early developer. He created Seminole Beach. He was also kind of the preeminent landscape architect early on, particularly in the 20s, made a lot of money. And even that globe, I thought at first when I saw that, before I read the caption, I'm like, oh, that's got to be at the Pan American Building, or City Hall at that time. Actually, no, it wasn't. Pan American Building. And off to the right, notice that they're holding a book. That is John Sewell's widow. He died a few years earlier. And I don't know if the book came out later, but his book is another invaluable resource to understand early Miami history. Matter of fact, a lot of the stories that we know about, including the mound that you found at where the Royal Palm Hotel was, or the Royal Palm Park was, a lot of those details, and some of them were not flattering for him, were listed in his recount in Miami Memoirs. So this is his widow offering up books to the entire club. So I mentioned induction into the honor roll. The very first one happened on October 21st, 1948, where Julia Tuttle's portrait was debuted. And you can see to the left, not a great picture, it's out of the newspaper. You had George Whitten and Joseph Cheatham. Joseph Cheatham, I believe, was the president of the organization at the time. By the way, Robert, why aren't we wearing a suit and tie, three-piece suits for these meetings? That's the way they were nicely dressed back in the day. And so this picture, and I'm going to hold off on where you can go and see it, is hanging in a public place, or somewhat public place. But they would do this is they would basically welcome into honor roll, and every time they would have a ceremony. And they did this and presented this, I believe it was done at the Bayfront Park Auditorium, if you remember that. I'll show that in a moment. So in 1949, I'm sorry, this is when they had their meeting in the Bayfront Park Auditorium. I believe this is the line on that day, July 28th, 1949. They learned their lesson about rain. So in this particular one, they're now doing it indoors. The Bayfront Park Auditorium was built as an armory by the Navy during World War II, and it was converted into an auditorium after that. So you can see, Not sure what the sign says, but it's, I call it Bayfront Park Auditorium. One of the things that they debuted shortly before that was that,
Municipal?
yeah,
auditorium?
municipal auditorium, thank you. A lot of people refer to it as Bayfront Park Auditorium. Matter of fact, if you read some of the articles, that's how they refer to it. Because you also had several other auditoriums that had municipal in the name. But anyway, so earlier that year in May, it was decided that the Miami Pioneers would get their own building. And it was probably the most attractive lease you can possibly expect. So what the city commissioners did is that they said, we'll give you a 99-year lease on land right along the Miami River by Lummis Park. And it's going to be $1 a year, payable on July 28th of every year. So they had, beginning in 1949, 1950, they had this 99-year lease where they can construct a building. And I don't know how they were raising money for operating and things like that, and even constructing the building, but they did have ways to make money off of this building, considering that they're only paying $1 a year. So before they actually got into that building, in that same, in the municipal auditorium, you can see here we had a variety of older pioneers accepting scrolls. So it was sort of a way of honoring some of them without actually doing a full honor, because that was reserved for anybody who had passed. So I want to point out a few names here, because this is the Miami Pioneers organization. It's good to know some of them. You have Myrtle Ann Frohock, who was the wife of John Frohock, who was the first sheriff of Dade County. So he came down and he was appointed marshal in 1899, city marshal, did that for a year, and then he became the sheriff of Dade County from 1900 to 1909. He was also very well known. He was a big citrus farmer, and he got involved with development as well. So if you know, on North Miami Avenue, there's a building that was preserved, at least half of it, called the Dade Apartments. He built that. He built several other apartment buildings in downtown Miami. Mark Brown, I mentioned, and you can see up here to the upper right, that's him right there as a younger man. So he received a scroll, and Isidore Cohen is probably best known as the first Jewish retailer in Miami. And he was a character. He's another one that wrote a book that's invaluable for those who like to research South Florida history. So in 1953, they actually finished the clubhouse and they dedicated it. And I thought one of the cool stories behind this is they had the great-grandson of the manufacturer, the guy who ran the company that manufactured the train, the first train that came to Miami in 1896. His name was Sheldon Ducky Weiler. He was 10 years old, and you can see he's holding an image or a rendition of the train, which you can see to the right. And so that's how they opened up the clubhouse. That was a seminal moment for them, because they were just moving around from location to location. Here's a very rare photograph. I tell you, one of the toughest photographs to find is of the clubhouse itself. And so I'm gonna give you a little bit closer of a look, but before I do that, this is Lummis Park back in the mid-1970s. So you can see here we have Scottish Rites, we have the Temple Court Apartments, which were unfortunately burned down within the last couple of years. Yeah. You have the park itself. Behind these trees, you have the Fort Dallas Barracks, slave plantation quarters. Mm-hmm. Can't see them in the trees, but notice what's missing: the Wagner House. Mm-hmm. And the Wagner House would not be moved there until 1979. So if we take a closer look, you can see right here is the clubhouse building, right on the river. Now, one of the big things for the club, Miami Pioneers Club, was this yacht basin or marina, whatever you might want to call it, because they could lease that out. They also had the opportunity to lease out, for events, the building. So they had National Card Association met there, the Realty Board Association met there. There were a lot of different groups that would meet there when the Miami Pioneers would not, because obviously they're not meeting every day. There were two caretakers that lived there permanently, and they were caretakers of the building. By the mid-70s into the 80s, it really became a dicey neighborhood. Matter of fact, they were afraid to even leave the building after dark. So in November of 1986, there was a big push to kind of revitalize the area around the park, and there was in the Miami News, there was an article about, it was really the Miami Pioneers building that's hindering development. And, they said they've got this lease, they have no incentive to leave it, and so there was a lot of pressure for them to leave the area and to leave that, and turn over that real estate for redevelopment. The clubhouse building lasted probably another decade. And I didn't find it at this location after 1996. And so that was long before that lease would have expired, and I just think that there was probably a lot of pressure to do that. One of the things and one of the implications of that is the clubhouse kept a lot of the memorabilia, kept a lot of old photographs, those paintings we talked about, or that I showed with Julia Tuttle. All of those were hanging in the facility, so all that stuff scattered. And as I was researching the Miami Pioneers, it was really tough to find a lot of good pictures and a lot of good records. I know that the folks that are part of Miami Pioneers do their best, but there was a point in time where a lot of that just went in a variety of different directions. Some of it sold, some of it given away, I guess, or maybe even some of it lost. So we're going to finish up just talking about the natives of Dade, and this is a newer organization. I think, Robert, you did a great job of kind of laying out how it came together organically, of people that, by the mid-1980s, probably 5 out of 6 people that you meet were just arrived. They were from somewhere else, they identified being from somewhere else, and so they wanted to put together a group. So on October 6, 1985, they put an ad in the paper and they said, why don't we meet at the First Presbyterian Church of Coral Gables on October 6, 1985, and that meeting really germinated into the natives of Dade. They had really one qualification. The requirement was that you had to be 50 years or older. And I think the implication was that you also had to have been born in Dade County. But that was never listed in any of the criteria that I found. Here's an early photograph. They would meet typically around Coral Gables and other areas in people's homes. However, by 1991, the group had 150 members. I don't know if all of them were active and if they would all show up for meetings, but I'm sure that they probably outgrew their building and started meeting in churches and things like that. And as Robert had mentioned, hold on one second, Elvis, is that they did merge with Miami Pioneers, creating Miami Pioneers Native of Dade in 2002. And by 2007, they actually dropped the requirement for you have to be 50 years or older. So I know I qualify, so. So I mentioned that, a lot of these artifacts were pretty much distributed in a lot of different directions. And there were a lot of oil paintings of former pioneers. And I found a bunch of them. Matter of fact, from top row left to right, we have Henry Flagler, John Collins, Everest G. Sewell, John Siebel. The next level, and I think this is probably a really bad picture of Merrick, but that's George Merrick. Doc Dammers, you had James Lummis, and you had John Lummis. I think John is, and then James. And then you had Ruth Bryan Owens. And they were all put into the honor roll as part of it. Each of these paintings I found at the Capitol Grill in Brickell. If you remember Size Rivergate, if you go through there and you walk around the paneled exterior, and of course that building, that's in the Rivergate building, which is going down at some point. So, I go there once in a while because I live right up the road. So I pulled the general manager over and I said, what are you guys gonna do with these when, this building, when you close and this building goes down? He goes, oh no, we're keeping those. And I looked at all the plates and they had all the right names on there, with the exception of one. On Julia Tuttle's painting, they had Mary Brickell. And I said to him, I said, you did a great job of maintaining these, but there's one error. That ain't Mary Brickell. And he was like, no, it is. It was on the painting. It was Mary Brickell. And so I pulled up a picture of Julia Tuttle and I compared it and I said, that's Julia Tuttle. I said, trust me, I do a little bit of research and I can tell you that's Julia Tuttle. So they supposedly were going to correct it. I've been back, but I keep forgetting to go check to see if they got the right nameplate on there. But that was a big error. And I want to finish with, part of the reason why I'm so passionate about South Florida history is that my great uncle was actually one of these Miami pioneers that were honored, after he was dead. He started the very first funeral home, Combs, residential style funeral home. He bought Edwin, why am I forgetting his last name? But anyway, he bought the original funeral service, made a residential style funeral home, and this was right here on Northeast 2nd Street and First Avenue. So where the Hahn building is today, that sat there prior to that. And the gentleman to the left is my great uncle, or great uncle, Walter Combs. So my grandmother was his niece. And that's a big part of that connection to Miami pioneers for me. He arrived in 1899. He was part of the freezes. The family ran orange groves and they were destitute. And he finally made his way down to Miami in 1899. Helped start the fire department in 1906. He was one of the many people that did that. And so once I started kind of piecing together my family's role in South Florida history, I really got very passionate about it. And I appreciate that you sat here and not walked out after I've been talking for I don't know how long. So I do want to point out, if you do want a book, I brought a bunch. I will sign them if you'd like. And please, if you're not a subscriber on the MiamiHistory.com, Miami-History.com, you're missing out on a lot of great content. You don't have to be a paid subscriber. A free subscriber gets the weekly newsletter on This Week in History, and then really any article I put out, that's the first place you'll know about it. So that's it. Thank you, and we can take questions. I know you have them. Go for it.
Could you go back in the slides? It would be
Why
great.
did I know you were going to ask me this? How far?
There,
Yes.
go forward one. Yeah, the house on the left.
Mm-hmm.
Does it still stand, or was that?
That is in Coral Gables, I believe. I think it still stands. It was one of the founding members of Native of Dade, and this is where they met for a few years.
Which one?
I can get back to you on that. I do, but I just don't have it committed to memory. So, any other
Do
questions?
you know the address?
Not in memory, but I know how to reach you. I'll get you that info.
Did you find me?
Anyone else have any questions?
So what happens to the Pan Am Miami City Hall building? If the Miami's
I'm hoping Elvis goes and buys it and makes it a nice museum. I've heard ideas. I mean, it is historically protected, which I'm not sure that has the same meaning as it used to have. But it's, I do think that they're probably going to convert it into maybe something that might be a little bit of a flight museum plus restaurant. It's hard to say. They haven't even moved out yet, so you know how things go. It has to sit vacant for a couple years before they actually decide what to do, and somebody's got to come in and do something with it.
For the high bidder.
Yeah, the high bidder. Just like with the Miami, the Dade County Courthouse. Same kind of thing. We're still trying to figure out what's going to happen with that.
I have a silly question. Where did they eliminate when the fishermen used to come in there by Bayside? Pier 5?
You're talking about Pier 5, yeah. So Pier 5 was,
I don't know if it was Pier 5, I was only a little kid.
yeah, it was Pier 5. And they still have the Maya Marina, so they still have boats that are there, but you're right, Pier 5.
The fishermen don't bring their fishing anymore.
no,
I've
no.
known that for a long time.
Yeah, that was Pier 5. That actually was still Pier 5 until the late 1960s, until about 1970. Then they redeveloped it to Miami Marina. Then 1984, they made it Bayside. So the Marina side of it is still Maya Marina, and Bayside is obviously around it.
I live in north end of the county, I don't go downtown anymore.
Yeah. I know how you feel. I live downtown. I don't go to the north end of the county.
I have a question about, another question. There used to be a building there was the boulevard, but there was a building here, and the fishing place was here, then they had the bridge on the side of what, a municipal building or whatever. it is.
Yeah, the auditorium.
I used to go there as a little kid, because we lived downtown Miami.
Yeah.
And there was a building on a corner where you were able to get for kids who didn't have the finances, like to get a bicycle or anything like that. There was a building there available, because I got my first bike
And it was on the park side, so it was on,
On the east side.
yeah. So
on the
there,
corner. And I don't remember the name of it, because that was, what, 10? Something like that? I
Yeah.
don't.
yeah, there was a building, although this would have been closer
What was
to,
it called? You.
I don't recall it. Okay, if I saw it, I would probably be able to identify it, but the way you
Yeah,
describe it, I
was trying to
can't.
see where it was on the pictures that you
Where's
have.
the Navy building?
Which Navy, the Subchaser? So actually, the Subchaser building is kind of interesting. It started off as a Curtiss Wright flight school for people to learn how to land planes in the water, and of course, that was right there by the FEC Pier, which is still there. That later became a restaurant, and then it was converted during World War II as a Subchaser
That's not
school.
what she's referring to.
No, that's a little bit north. She's talking about right by the auditorium, right? Yeah.
Well, to the west, there was the Goodwill building, which was one here before that, and they sold things there.
That could be a Goodwill building would make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Yeah, but I think also like
Nice
Carnival,
together.
yeah, Carnival had a building right on the boulevard. It would have been on the west side, not the same side as the auditorium. And I know that they did things for kids and that it would make sense that early on Carnival probably would have done something like that out of their building. So I would have to, I'd have to look that up. I'm not familiar with that story, so.
Where was the first, I'm sorry.
You only get 3, the 4th one's gonna cost you.
I'm sorry. I have so many questions in my head that I remember.
I get that.
No, addresses.
No, do you want to go ahead and fire away and ask the question?
No.
Well, think about it.
No, go ahead, I forgot.
Yeah,
already.
and if anybody wants, I can give you, I give you my email address by card, and I tell you, I get emails all the time through my website, and people have just random questions. I had somebody reach out to me and said, yeah, my great-great-great-grandfather did this, and I was able to give them information and newspaper clippings on their great-great-great-grandfather, so if it's something I know, and if it's easy enough to research, I'll do it, so.
So the pioneers were there at the church in Coral Gables until they
Yeah.
leveled the church.
I think that they left before that and came down here. I think the church was still up for a little while longer.
Yeah, we were at the church for a pretty long time, and I'm gonna say 2014, we moved over to the Coral Gables Museum,
Yes.
which then changed hands when Valdez Foley came in and started running it, and he wanted everything to make money. And they were very generous to us, as the library is, to give us a place to meet. And then that era ended. And so it was really a pleasure to move over here and have a great facility with bad parking. No, I'm just kidding.
Not all the time.
And Ellen, I have to say, has been such a champion for us. And when you look at the groups that do meet here, I think it's really, it shows you that the library is reaching out to groups that they consider to be culturally valuable. And meeting here, it's just a wonderful opportunity for us. So.
Yeah, I think I gave my first 2 talks at that church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a great little church, and we gave them, money every month, and they were very, very appreciative of that.
I would go there. When we first moved to Coral Gables, we didn't have any relatives in town, so I liked it because it was like having grandparents.
Yeah.
Eat chocolate donuts, and
Yeah, no, it's true.
we didn't qualify to become members, so we just got to enjoy it without.
Well, and I tell people, when I first joined, I was 42 and you had to be 50. This stupid rule about being 50, right? And so the membership lady, this lady named Joy, she would just say, shh, don't tell anybody that you're not 50. But at 42, I looked 28, so I really wasn't fooling anybody. And then I joined the board, and we every board meeting, we would talk about that rule a little bit, like, what's the 50? Oh, you're such a nice young man, but it's 50, And so they just weren't budging. And then for years and years, finally, I put it up for a vote, and it won by 1 vote or something. And then, next thing you know, the 50 went away.
But
So
these clubs had all these rules about ages,
Right.
like,
And arrival,
you have to be here before. Well, you're, in a sense, pre-signing your death certificate.
Yes.
Well, in a way, yeah.
And we'd have ended up the same way without changing the age
Well,
group.
and you saw what happened, the Miami Pioneers got down to about 11 people. They had to sell the building. And interestingly, one little note about the joining of the groups, Miami Pioneers had nonprofit status forever. They were a proper 501c3.
Or,
And the natives of Dade, natives of Dade
big difference.
somehow let theirs go, or whoever was the treasurer wasn't watching what happened. And so one of the reasons they merged together was Miami Pioneers had a legitimate 501 organization. So maybe that's why their name went first, the merger, I don't know, but what's really a shame, and I think what we've learned today, is that they had a building full of memorabilia that's irreplaceable. And they had the sad, choice of having to give some of it to this museum and some of it to that one. And I know that different historians and different collectors got bits of it, but that had to be the greatest collection of memorabilia about the beginning of Miami ever. And people write to us all the time, oh, in your archives, do you have this? And I'm like, we don't have anything.
Their meetings were open to the public, because I used to go there in the mid-70s.
Yeah,
On the river.
yeah.
I met a bunch of them.
It seemed like a very modest building.
That was before I
Yeah.
got into the history, yeah. We both see some of the others.
But what a deal, they had that incredible property on the river for $1. And of course, the neighbors were like, how did they get this deal? I don't know if you remember the place Jimbo's is out there, right? And everybody goes, how did Jimbo get that free thing for life? Because they offered it to him. Jimbo's pen in his pocket. So they offered it to him because nobody wanted it. And they were like, will you take it? He's like, yes. They go, thank God. And then every 10 years, somebody in the city of Miami would go, how the hell did he get that deal? And he would have to show them the deal,
Because Mayor Steve Clark was always there.
Yeah, and J.L. Clark, the people that knew the deal, were still around. But I could see where they had so much pressure with their $1 building on the river.
Do they have a liquor license?
Well, unofficially, And you know what they were also doing, and you could sort of tell, they were renting out boat slips.
Yeah.
Which was very
And they were
valuable.
leasing the building out. It was probably a moneymaker, but I think the larger point was that the membership got small. The
Yeah.
caretakers were like, they were getting older, they didn't like the
They were getting
neighborhood.
scared.
They were getting scared, and, at that point, they relented, and they still had they only used about a third of the lease, 99-year lease.
Yeah.
So,
Well, they actually got it they started late in 36, the